Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. Thank you all again for joining us this afternoon to talk about how to safeguard your online holiday shopping. So during the next hour, we'll talk about how to protect your identity, your devices, and your wallet during the during the holiday shopping season, and especially as we get into Black Friday as well. Uh, Please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be available to everybody by tomorrow morning. If you have questions at any time, feel free to put them in the Q&A box and we'll try to get to as many as possible by the end of the hour. Next slide, please. To start out with a bit about us, if you're not familiar with the National Cybersecurity Alliance, we're a nonprofit organization on a mission to empower a more secure, interconnected world. We do this by providing free resources, articles, and webinars like this one throughout the year that cover different topics in cybersecurity, data privacy, and online safety. So we make all of our programs and tips and advice available through our website, StaySafeOnline.org, and through our programs throughout the year. We co-lead Cybersecurity Awareness Month in October. We have programs for small businesses and students interested in cybersecurity careers. And we also have a Data Privacy Week campaign coming up at the end of January. So if you're interested in learning more about us, you can check out our website and we'll have our contact information available at the end of the webinar as well. So now on the next slide, I'd like to introduce our two speakers today. We have Lisa Plackmeyer, the Executive Director of the National Cybersecurity Alliance, and Lynette Owens, Vice President of Global Consumer Education and Marketing at Trend Micro. And I'll turn it over to the two of them to get started.
Thanks, Jen, and thanks, Lynette, for joining us. So this is going to be a fireside chat format. Lynette and I are just going to chat about a few topics, but we'd really like your involvement and your engagement. So if you have any questions, go ahead and put those in the Q&A, or if you have comments, you can throw those in the chat, and we'll try to work those in as we go, or if we're getting on a roll, then we'll be taking more of them at the end. So with that, let's get started. So Lynette, with Black Friday and the holiday season just around the corner, what are the common online scams that you're seeing this year? What do people need to be looking out for?
Hi, everyone, and thanks so much, Lisa and team, for having me on today. Just within the last 6 weeks, as we do every year, we start to see an uptick in scams related to holiday shopping. A lot of it is centered around Black Friday. And actually this year, we've seen a 14% increase in the number of malicious websites designed to, lure you into getting a deal, or and then in the process giving up information that you may not have intended to do to a party that you thought was legitimate and isn't. And those kinds of scams are related to discounts on a lot of apparel, luxury items. We're also seeing an increasing amount, which I'm sure many of us have experienced, of those scams being delivered through text messages, letting you know that a shipment is arriving or arriving late. If you don't click here and tell us where to redirect it, you may not get it. And so, yeah, they're just coming fast and furiously once again. And we really need to be on the lookout for what seems to be fairly convincing communications coming from these fraudsters.
Yeah, and they use that sense of urgency, especially when you get texts, those smishing attempts, SMS phishing basically is where that word comes from. They can use that sense of urgency, as Lynette said, if you don't click here, we won't be able to deliver your package, for example. How do people check if a text is legitimate or not? What kind of signs should they be looking for?
I think some very common techniques that you might have already been practicing with emails or even posts in social media, which I feel sometimes can be even more dangerous because it could have been shared by someone you trust, and therefore it feels more validated because it was shared by someone you trust. But things like grammatical errors and URLs that seem to be misspelled, and we definitely don't recommend clicking on a link within a text. And Lisa, if I might, we actually have a free tool that allows you to send a text message to us, and we will let you know immediately if it's malicious or not.
Really?
It's called Trend Micro Check. Yes, you can get
Trend
that
Micro Check.
on the app stores. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, both text-based as well as if there's a link in it, we do analyze that for you and send you back a, is it okay or not? But I think there's also some basic things people can do in advance. I think keeping track of what you're doing. I have this habit where unfortunately I wait a little too late with my shopping, and then I'm sort of shopping
You're not allowed.
furiously, and then I cannot remember who is sending what by which delivery mechanism.
Mhm.
So I think that, first of all, not rushing and planning enough time so you're not sort of doing everything on top of each other. The second is saving those confirmation emails after you've made the purchase, and it's very clear to you how and when you should be expecting that package, and keeping track of that somewhere. So when that suspicious text or email comes through, you'll know whether or not to ignore it immediately. I think the second thing is, please use in whatever device, whether it's a tablet or a phone or a laptop or a desktop, please make sure you're using up-to-date reputable security software
Mhm.
on those devices. So if you do accidentally click, or maybe someone in your house does it, they will be prevented from going to that link in the first place because it's already been analyzed by the company whose software you're using.
Yep. Yep. Very important to keep your antivirus up to date. What are some other best practices that consumers can use to ensure their data is protected and they're staying safe online during the holidays?
Sure. Well, I think the other thing that happens during this time of year is we're very tempted by the offer to get free shipping, 20% off, or some other kind of, um, you know, desirable benefit for the purchase by giving up a phone number to them, and you allow them to text you in the future, or an email address, or sign
Mhm.
up for an account with that vendor. So, my recommendation is, provided you've done your homework, it's a reputable vendor or site, and you do want to take advantage of such deal, make sure you're keeping track of the passwords that you're setting up um, for those accounts in something like a password manager. Highly recommend that. And then after the holidays are over, when you start to get the barrages of emails saying after holiday discounts and so on, and you don't want to be on those anymore, start unsubscribing. That's a
Yeah.
good New Year's resolution, actually. Start unsubscribing for all those emails you signed up for the deals. And I think the other is there are times where you might have done your homework and the vendor is fine, but the seller, if it's one of those kinds of websites where there are multiple types of sellers on the site, make sure you do your homework about the product itself. Make sure that the product is something that has great reviews, and you've done your homework in terms of, is it associated with any scams? You can easily look up the name of the product and the word scam and see, is this
Right.
associated with any previous, fraudulent behavior? Do all of that homework before you ever begin to put a credit card in.
Yeah, there's also websites out there that will help you check to see if the reviews are legit, because there's so many illegitimate review sites out there, or just illegitimate reviews on reputable sites. I'm trying to remember what it's called. Fake Spot, I think, is the service that my husband uses to check whether or not reviews seem legitimate. Yeah, because some things, I think one of the other things to remember in general when it comes to holiday shopping, whether it's the reviews or it's the price, if it sounds too good to be true, then it probably is. Black Friday sales notwithstanding, sometimes there's things that are on reputable sites, the price will be the usual price. but there's a lot of other sites out there where the pricing seems unrealistically low, and maybe the site doesn't have the reputation that all the established shopping
Yeah,
sites.
and I've just known too many anecdotal stories of um, a site, which I won't name, where multiple sellers can sell, and you think you're getting the product that is pictured, and then it ends up
Mm.
being 2 inches tall versus what you thought you were getting. It's not that you didn't get what was pictured, it's just it wasn't exactly as you thought it was. And so, yeah, I think we really have to be wary. The good thing is that if you're staying on a reputable site, you should be able to get your money back. You should be able to return it and
Right.
get your money back. I think it's when we see these deals floating around on a social media site, and someone has endorsed it that in your circle of in your social network, you might be tempted to go there if it's a vendor you've never heard of before. And that's where I think the trouble can start.
So if you've unfortunately been the victim of some sort of shopping scam, even if you've used some reasonable measures to protect yourself, something does go wrong. What can these victims do?
I think it starts with you might want to consider how you paid for it in the first place. And I think that's one thing I should have said earlier, is that probably the safest thing you can do is use a credit card, because for the most part you'll be able to be fully reimbursed for a fraudulent charge. Some it depends on who your bank is, but maybe at most $50 will be out of your pocket. But for the most part, you're fully reimbursed. But if you use some other means, there are things you can do, such as make sure you're signed up for purchase protection programs. I think, of course, you should report this, by the way, to your credit card company or whoever's payment method you used. Report it to the seller themselves, and then report it to the law enforcement, like the FTC. I mean, I think it's important for organizations to know of these things happening so they can accumulate the knowledge from people all over the country and the world. Um, just short of that, we highly recommend considering, especially if you're buying very big ticket items, um, making sure you might consider something like identity protection insurance, because, and it's not just because of the money you could have lost, that in the process of defrauding you, you may or may not have lost something else. You may or may not have lost some other piece of personal information in that process. And so by having a service like that, you would also be alerted to things as if, okay, now this piece of data of you, not just your credit card, a
Maybe
password,
your social security number or
yeah,
something like that.
something
Yeah.
is leaking in the dark web, and so on. They've made
Mhm.
other purchases in your name. So we are big fans of recommending that in addition, especially if you are prone to buying these larger priced items, or if you're just concerned, it's a good option
Right.
to consider. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think keeping track of everything that happened in that purchase process, because some vendors, like a PayPal or a Venmo, so these alternative payment vendors, they may need documentation. It's just good to know, when did you buy it, how did you buy it, what link led you there, and any kind of tracking that you can do, I think will be to your benefit.
The
If
other
there's
advice we give people when it comes to identity theft is to freeze their credit. With
Yes.
the three main credit bureaus, it's a little bit of effort when you want to apply for a new credit card or get a car loan or a mortgage or something like that. But that's more preventative than identity theft protection. Tells you if something's gone wrong. Freezing your credit means nobody can run your credit to begin with. Is that correct?
Yeah, and actually, even knowing that something's leaked in the dark web isn't not necessarily indication that you've been defrauded or a victim of
Right.
identity theft, but it's an early sign that you can take action on, and that's why we are fans of it.
Yep. Yep.
Yep.
I have heard people say that it takes a little more effort to enroll. We usually recommend that people enroll their children as well. If you've got a child with a nice clean social security number, that can be used to create a synthetic identity with somebody else's name and birth date, and they can do a lot of damage with that. You might not know until your child grows up and gets a credit card or something. So I have heard that it takes a little more paperwork to do that. I don't have minor children anymore, but I think there's a snail mail process you have to go to freeze their credit.
Yes, and we do recommend that as well. You don't want to find out when they're applying for financial aid or something when
Right.
if they plan on going to college and they already have sort of a terrible credit report trailing them. Yeah, it
That's
is
a bad
something
wake-up call, yeah.
absolutely right. I mean, I think that there are a lot of things we can do to prevent these kinds of things in the first place. And I realize we're sort of straying a little bit from just the shopping experience, but you know, in these moments when we lean most on the internet are also the moments when all kinds of criminals will take advantage of you. And
Right.
it's not just to steal your credit card number. So I do feel like we're doing a public service by raising this issue within this context during this time when many of us will be leaning on the internet.
Yeah, and I think it's when you think about identity theft, and maybe I had it happen to me a year or two ago. Somebody went into a Nordstrom's in Dallas with a driver's license with their picture but my details, and they were able to convince the store to let them charge without the card present. So they didn't have a copy of my card, but they knew the account number, and they had a driver's license, and they knew my social security number, and they were able to do it that way. And so we're so busy during the holidays, and had I not been checking my statement or logging on and looking at recent charges, then you're not going to notice. So I think that's something to keep in mind. It's just with the busyness of the holidays, maybe you and your spouse share an account and you're both charging things, and so you just dismiss something as being legitimate because, oh, maybe this is something that my partner bought, or I just wasn't in the loop. And so it's just really, really important to check what's happening on your cards to make sure. I think we're more vulnerable to that sort of identity theft because we're just not, too much activity, and we're not paying attention. We get busy, like you said.
Absolutely.
Any other advice out there, best practices for consumers in general when it comes to
yeah,
shopping?
absolutely. I think in general, some, and I don't know how obvious this is for some, but during the decision to shop, a lot of us are starting to use our mobile phones a lot more, and so I would highly recommend don't use public Wi-Fi if you can avoid it while you're out and about. You might have been in the store and said, I bet I can get that on such and such site better than what I'm seeing right in front of me in the store. So you go to your phone and you start looking and you say, there it is. I'm going to grab it now because I don't want it to come late. But consider having something like a virtual private network, a VPN application, so that you're not connecting on the public Wi-Fi and also making yourself vulnerable to cyber criminals from, being able to intercept that personal data going from you to the vendor, such as a credit card or any other kind of personal information. So that is one thing. We tend to use our mobile phones a lot more, I think, these days.
Yeah, if you're looking for a VPN, trying to figure out which one you want to use, we recommend looking at sites like Tom's Guide, Consumer Reports, PC Mag, sites like that. There are scammy VPNs out there put out there by cyber criminals. So just make sure that you're buying one of the major ones that's mentioned on all the legitimate review sites. Make sure you're on a legitimate review site and you're looking at one that's well known and well reviewed. So somebody is asking in the Q&A, what about mobile wallets as payment methods? Are those safe to use instead of a debit card?
In as much as you trust yourself not to lose the phone, or maybe someone in your house that you gave the phone to, like a child, to not use the phone. I think it's important that there's risk with every option. There is risk with every option. And I think when you make that decision to use an option, understand what is your recourse if something were to go wrong. If you're
Right.
sort of blindly giving, deciding to sign up for these mobile wallets, or maybe you're gifting a phone to someone and they start using it like a child in your house, um, understand ahead of time what your recourse is if something does go awry. So that's I'm not going to necessarily recommend one over the other. I do think they all have their inherent risks.
Somebody's asking about a product that Capital One offers called Eno, a virtual one-time use credit card number that's tied to your regular credit card for online purchases. Are they safe? And if they are safe, why don't more credit card companies offer them? I don't know if we can answer the second part of that, but I think my guess is since it's being offered by a reputable large financial services institution, that it's a viable option. Do you have an opinion on things like that?
I would agree with you. I'm not familiar with this particular product in general, but yes, because it is a reputable institution, I would say yes.
Yep.
I think the only thing is, and because I'm not familiar with it, I think we have to be careful of things like the charges, finance charges, and things like that associated with anything that seems like a good offer, right? I think you have to just make sure you read the fine print.
Somebody else is asking what antivirus you should use for a cell phone.
Yeah, I will say, trend included, but if you went to Tom's Guide, if you went to any of the reputable review sites, look up what are the best, device protection, antivirus protection for a mobile device, you'll find quite a bit of good information out there. So a lot of the people who you might be familiar with for a desktop or laptop, also you might have paid for a 5 or 10 suite license already, actually includes a mobile device. So if you didn't realize that, you should maybe take a look at your subscription for that and just use that, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th license for your mobile devices. All of them, by the way.
And make sure your operating system on your mobile device is up to date. That's really important. I don't think most people realize that a lot of those updates can fix security issues. So be sure to use the latest iOS or
I would say the operating systems as well as every app, especially payment apps, but even shopping apps, make sure you're keeping those up to date. The problem is I actually recommend some people just have it on all the time, just update as the updates come. But the problem with that is it can be a battery drain. So you could also set it to do at night before you go to bed, or maybe this time of year you should probably turn it on to automatic just because we're just that more vulnerable. But if you're wondering why the drain on your battery might be happening, it could be A, you have too many apps on your phone, and B, they're updating all the time.
Can you have too many apps, really? So speaking of devices, gifts like phones and tablets and IoT devices, the smart home devices, are super common and very popular during the holiday season. How can you educate a family member on how to use them safely when you're gifting something like that?
That's a great question, and I think it also depends on who that family member is. Let's start with, let's say it's someone younger in your house. It's a child that you're getting their first phone or a gaming device or an e-reader or a tablet of some kind. We have a rule of 3, and that is, or sorry, this concept of 3 things to set them up for healthy and safe use of that device. The first is to set the environment for them so that they will be safe. That means if they are using this device in your home a lot, we recommend with your router, you have the ability to have a guest network and a main network. You might consider having your kids' devices on the guest network. And then anything that you're sensitively doing on your home network, like work or taxes or whatever, right, on the main network. And this way, in case something goes awry on their device, you at least have some kind of division between the two. Absolutely. And the second is, making sure that you're using things like the settings within the device that limits them from seeing content they shouldn't, or using apps that they're maybe too young for, games that maybe are a little too violent for their age at this time. So those are good things to set up the right environment. Setting the rules, when are they allowed to use it, when and where, and with whom. And finally, setting a good example. So if you don't want them looking at it at the dinner table or all the time, maybe look in the mirror and see if you're setting that example or not.
Yeah.
If you're gifting something to an older member of your family, and we're in an interesting time in history where I think there's 5 generations coexisting right now. It's phenomenal, right? But there's a couple things you can do, because maybe some of those older adults in your life aren't as comfortable with technology, but they very much, and you very much want them to be on Facebook so they can stay connected with you or their friends, or do FaceTime with you when you're not together, and so they can see their grandkids and so on. Is making sure a lot of the same things, setting them up to have a safe and healthy use of that. And then I think one of the things that we are big proponents of, actually, and this comes from, the demographic shifts, the massive demographic shifts happening, not just in the United States, but across the world. I believe by the year 2030, 1 in 6 people will be over the age of 60. And, having gone through this with my own parents, it's a good time during the holidays to have a conversation about what we're calling the digital estate. And in this discussion, it's understanding, yes, you should keep track of all your passwords, but who's that backup? And I'm not talking about bank accounts and retirement accounts where you're designating beneficiaries. I'm talking about Facebook. Who is your legacy contact? Your iCloud account with all those photos. Who is your legacy contact there?
Mhm.
Actually, not every site that you or your older adult might use has the ability to set legacy contacts, but they're getting better. And I think these are important conversations, we should have at some point. And so, you know, we could go on a whole other fireside chat on this, Lisa.
Yep.
Love to do that, but I think that this is something different that you might talk to the older adult in your life versus the younger people in your life.
Yeah, password managers can be really helpful there too. If you have a family account, which that allows you to share passwords amongst family members, most of the time that means a paid password manager account. But just we've had issues with this in my family. My mom likes to click on a lot of things. And so, my sister and I have the ability to go in and look at her credit card statements, make sure that there aren't any fraudulent charges there, or things like that. So password managers just make it a whole lot easier to do those things.
Absolutely. Yes. And having that conversation about, how they want things taken care of,
Yep.
and and so on.
So we have another question. Somebody wants to know if we actually recommend the old bricks and mortar shopping above online shopping, because there are always risks. And I would say, please chime in, Lynette, but I would say from my perspective, if you're being really smart about it, the time when cyber criminals trip us up is when we're in a hurry, we're not paying attention. We succumb to that, emotional text of like, click here now, or we're not going to be able to deliver your package, or whatever it is, or there was a problem with your shipment, or, here's a receipt for something that you didn't buy, that makes you think there's fraud on your account. So you're tempted to click on that. I think having, some common sense about it, and just not rushing through, and just being present. We have such a hard time being mindful these days because there is information overload going on, and we do get stressed and we get overloaded, and that's when we're most likely to maybe click on something we shouldn't. Do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I would agree with you, Lisa. Having said that, I'm a big fan of Small Business Sunday. I think if you can support your local businesses, there is absolutely no reason not to do that. And I was in a Barnes and Noble the other day, and I was just reveling in it, saying there used to be more options.
There used to be more of those. Yeah.
And there's just something really comforting about going into a bookstore,
Shopping in
independent
person.
bookstores and so
Yeah.
on. Absolutely. And I think that, there's nothing wrong. Maybe balance the two. Sometimes you can find things in a small business that you can't find anywhere else, even
That's
online.
true. Yep. Somebody would like to know if Trend Microcheck is free.
It is.
The app that you mentioned. Awesome.
Yes, it is.
Somebody says, regarding shopping from a mobile phone, wouldn't the 5G connection be a secure option when you're not on a trusted network so that you wouldn't have to use a VPN? This came in when we were talking about VPNs for your phone.
Gosh, I don't know that I'm able to truly answer
I
that
know a 5G
question.
expert we can ask, but I don't know the answer off the top of my head to that one either. I think he might be correct. But we can check on that one. Maybe Lucas or Jen, you can look that up, or we have a board member who would know that for sure. You recommended using a password manager. My web browser and my Google account prompt me to save new websites and accounts and passwords all the time. Are these the same thing?
In a sense, they are. It's being saved in some place, and I think that the question is, do you often use browsers on shared places, like
Devices,
a library, or in that case, I think it's dangerous when you're starting to use it in browsers in shared places, but it's certainly an option for you.
I think so. From the research that we've done, so Google, the password manager, if you will, that's built into Google Chrome, is starting to act more and more like a freestanding password manager application. But like you said, if you're on a shared device, or if you're like a lot of folks who walk around with a phone that doesn't have a lock screen, for example, or you don't have a lock screen on your laptop, somebody else gets a hold of your device, or somebody's in your home and has access to your device, you don't have a lock screen, or the lock screen hasn't, you haven't turned it on. If you walk away, what you have to do then is have more protection around the device itself if somebody can get to your browser and then get to your passwords. Another question: what do you think of browser add-ons like Rakuten, which monitor your shopping? I see where there might be privacy concerns there, but we have seen some research that shows us that people are willing to trade data for discounts. So they'll actually make that calculation and decide that they'll give up some of their privacy to, for example, in this case, where they've been shopping, in exchange for a little discount. So what do you think?
And this is the story of convenience that I think that vendors who have been successful have been able to show you the value you will get for the exchange of your data, right? I'm not necessarily opposed to like browser extensions per se. We actually have one in our identity protection solution that can tell you all kinds of things. Like it'll tell you on that page how many cookies are there, how many, is the page actually tracking your physical location? Is it trying to turn the camera on? Is it malicious, the page itself? So I'm not at all opposed to the idea of browser extensions at all, especially if they're meant to do good things. But like you said, Lisa, that's the exchange we all make, and it's such a personal decision. I remember asking a group of teenagers, do you pay for Instagram, for example? And half of them raised their hands, like, I guess I didn't with money, but I'm paying with my personal information. They don't quite understand why.
Right.
And then they realize, oh, that's why I'm seeing that ad everywhere I go. So it's such a personal thing. And, I think up until the point that any vendor becomes breached, right, is the point at which, we're okay. But if you're concerned that a vendor of any kind has the risk of being breached, having a data breach, then that's where we say, how much can I do? I can't really control that. What I can do is be vigilant. I can use a service like identity protection because at least I'll be alerted if the breach somehow impacts me.
Yeah, and what you have to remember is that the more your data is out there, the more you choose to share or give permission for access. As those data breaches happen, cyber criminals are building data warehouses. They know an awful lot about us, and so that can make us more susceptible to social engineering campaigns, because when you get a phone call or a text and it's very detailed and they seem like they know an awful lot about you, right? Well, that must be my bank calling me because they know my account number. They have all this other information about me. So obviously this is who they say they are. That's information that is available on the dark web. A lot of it's available, if you think about the amalgamation of all the different social media sites where we post, there's a lot of information that's publicly available. So when you put that all together, and it paints such a complete picture of our lives, it just makes it easier for somebody to trick us because we're more apt to trust them because it sounds like they know so much about us. This must be who they say they are, but that's not always the case.
And you bring up a good point, Lisa, because especially during this time of year, we'll be gathering like with people we care about, and we'll be taking photos, and somebody in the family is going to put that up somewhere for someone to see. And so the data that we worry about sometimes is not even surreptitiously collected about us. Sometimes it's our own doing. So I think we, like I've said to people, there's nothing wrong with telling people where you've been and not where you are. So maybe wait a little bit before you post. Yeah.
When you share those things that you're only sharing with your friends list, for example. So we have a page on StaySafeOnline.org that has links to all the privacy and security settings for all the popular apps. So you don't need to share it with the whole world. You can share things with your friends list, for example. I think the more prevalent AI scams get, the more people are going to need to rein in their settings because the more pictures that are out there of you publicly, the easier it is for a fraudster to create something using AI. You create a deep fake, a video or a photo of you to try and trick your grandmother or something. So we just really need to lock down who can see what in social media. How secure are patch updates for devices? I have been given mixed reviews about this. Are they mostly essentials and necessary in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I still would err on the side of doing them than not doing them.
Yeah, and most of them you need to do quickly because I've had questions before. People say, well, what if there's kinks in it? What if it's a patch that causes more problems for me as the user of the device? All those things get a decent amount of testing before they're released. But usually, if they're released in haste, it's usually because somebody is doing something really, exploiting that vulnerability somehow. Somebody's doing something bad, and you don't want to be the next victim. So I would say if it's not a good patch, if there's something wrong with the patch, that'll usually be really apparent within hours of the patch being released. And so don't wait. It's better to apply those. If you open a tab with your debit card at a bar or restaurant, is it easy for someone else to use your debit card fraudulently? This is one I've never considered.
I know we put a lot of trust into people, right? Like I said, I think anywhere you're going to use your credit card, there's always risk, right? And it's just a question of, to what degree you trust that. Now, if you want to be like me, who still carries around cash, you could just not open the tab and pay everything cash.
My advice would be to use a credit card for that instead of a debit card, because if anything fraudulent, then you're not liable. Yeah.
Correct.
Just pay off your balance every month, and it's kind of like a debit card.
That's right. Then you're fine. Yeah.
Some applications will not allow access if a VPN is on. I run into that myself too. Some websites can be a little hard to use with a VPN. Are there options to override this for access to the VPN? Can continue to provide protection. I haven't heard of any. Do you have any advice on that one?
No, I don't think so. And I think the reason is that those sites actually want to know what you're doing and where you're going. And they're trying to track a lot of stuff. So it's really a question of which trade-off do you want to make? Use the site and no VPN, or use VPN and use a different site?
I think there's actually security measures in place. There are some sites, for example, like where the drugstore where I fill my prescriptions, they don't have any stores outside of the US. And so if it looks like you're coming from a location outside of the US, they will block you from access to the site. Well, a VPN can do that. And so I actually have to turn my VPN off to be able to fill my prescriptions, which seems counterintuitive, but you've really got two different security measures that are just kind of fighting with each other there.
Right. That's right.
Are password managers safe to use? This is a question.
Yeah, I mean, again, it depends on who the company who makes it, and that's where you need to do your research on the best ones out there. Yes, but they are. let's just say it's better than writing all your passwords down on a piece of paper.
Yeah, we also say that when you use a password manager, when you have long, complex passwords and you use multi-factor authentication on all your accounts, and you have a long, complex password and you're using MFA on the password manager itself. In fact, we would recommend that if the password manager does not offer multi-factor authentication for you to secure the password manager itself, get another one, because I have heard rumors that there are, I don't know which ones they are, but I have heard from people that there are password managers out there that don't mandate MFA. And I think that's, from our perspective, that's not a good password manager.
It's ironic. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see. I'm concerned about a breach of a password manager. Any suggestions or comments? I think it's really about using MFA. If somebody has your password, if that in the rare, it's incredibly rare that somebody would get the encrypted password and the encryption keys. The only case I know of is the recent LastPass hack, which happened through an outdated streaming app that an employee was using at home. So it's another argument for you to make sure all the technology in your house is up to date and patched, including things like streaming apps, which I hadn't even thought of until that breach happened. That's incredibly, incredibly rare that they would get the encrypted passwords and the encryption keys. That's why you want to use multi-factor authentication, because that means if somebody has your password without that second factor, they can't get into your account. Anything you want to add to that, Lynette?
Yeah, I would. And if anyone out there is concerned about a password of yours, being leaked on the dark web, we have another free option where you can, it's an online dark web monitoring check. Immediately it will spit back to you.
What is that
This
called?
password's been ID Protect. idprotect.trimicro.com, idprotect.trimicro.com, and you go
Lucas will put that in the chat.
dark web monitoring. Just you can enter in. We have both a paid service and a free, but for free you can put in a password and email address if you want, and it'll tell you all the places that might have leaked. And if you see it has been, go into those accounts right away and change the password, or close out that account. You're like, oh, I didn't even know I signed up for that. I need to just close that account.
So a few questions about the dark web, since we've wandered off onto the dark web now. Somebody asked, what is it exactly? And somebody says, I really don't understand it. I don't want to see it yet. I've heard of it and I understand it is a bad thing. So do you want to give the high level description of what the dark web is?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's maybe better, and I'll let you embellish here, Lisa. There's the surface web, things that I could easily find about you if I did a Google search and your name comes up. Then there's the dark web, which was that next layer down where, you have
to have a special browser to get there.
Yes, and it is usually where criminals are trying to make trades, exchange money for a bunch of personal information that they've been able to steal. And then they've got the deep web, which is even darker than that. So, I think that just to give context in terms of where.
Yeah, I think the thing that's most relevant to this conversation today is that when we talk about identity theft and we talk about scams, malware, viruses, infections, all those things, there's basically a marketplace out there. There are multiple websites that look kind of like Amazon. They look like any other retail site, but what they're selling is horrible. They're selling credit card information. They're selling complete identities, social security numbers, date of birth, address, all that kind of stuff. They're also selling drugs, weapons, humans. Human trafficking takes place on the dark web. So there's lots of nasty stuff that gets bought and sold. Every time one of those marketplaces gets taken down, we all cheer, because that means usually federal law enforcement and collaboration between different countries like Interpol will be involved to take some of those sites down. You can buy malware, you can pay somebody to conduct a ransomware attack or take down somebody's website, a DDoS attack. It's where a lot of bad things happen. But I think the key for people to understand is that it looks just like the legitimate world, only it's evil. So these folks, this is highly, highly organized crime and nation state activity from some of the notorious bad actors in the world, like North Korea and Iran, China, Russia. Those are kind of the big four. And they treat this like their job. And so that's why when we talk about these threats and some of this sounds kind of intimidating. It's really not, the hacker in the hoodie image of somebody in a basement somewhere. These are businesses that look like our businesses. They're organized into departments. They have agreements with other criminal organizations where they might outsource a particular part of their scam in order to perpetrate it. They sell malware to each other. So it's really not some of the things we tell ourselves, the tricks we like to use, like, what really constitutes a good password for my online shopping accounts. Those tricks where we think if we take our normal password and then change a few characters, those aren't going to work because you're up against technology, you're up against organized crime, you're up against a password cracking tool, for example. You're not up against somebody who's just like lurking you and trying to guess your password. These are done at large scale, these scams, and they're using technology to do it. They want to be efficient and be effective, just like we want to be in our jobs. And I think that's when you realize that you're up against something that's highly evolved and organized and well orchestrated. It's not just the proverbial kid in mom's basement somewhere. Then I think you have to really take a look at your habits and make sure you're using best practices. Someone told me credit card numbers can be stolen at a distance. For instance, someone tapping your credit card while walking past you, kind of like modern pickpocketing. Yeah, do you? I'm not familiar with those devices, but I know there are devices and there are wallets you can buy that will protect the information on your cards. Are you familiar with?
I'm not as familiar with that, but that doesn't surprise me. And I think that isn't that why they sell those RFID wallets where you can protect your credit cards. So consider that's actually a good gift for this holiday.
Yeah,
a wallet that has RFID protection, so that if they walk by you, they wouldn't be able to scan that.
It's I think it's relatively rare because it's not as scalable as a lot of cybercrime because it involves physical proximity. But it does. I have heard of it happening. Let's see. Let me skip to this one. What are some red flags that we can point out to our friends or family that a site might be fraudulent? So how can you tell if a site is fraudulent?
Oh gosh, yeah.
A site that's impersonating a trusted site.
Yeah. And it's funny. I've learned how to set up a Square website. I work with a nonprofit and selling merchandise, and it's incredibly easy. The bar is very low for someone to open up a website, and then if it's for nefarious purposes, very easy to do, right? So I think some of the signs are, first of all, especially ideally at the point you visit the site, but certainly at the point you're doing a payment, making sure that the URL says HTTPS. If the S is not there, I think or a lock in the web address, I think that's a sign that you should not trust it. The second, looking for, language issues. But I think with AI now, AI can really help criminals perfect their grammar. And so that might not be the best sign any longer. I think other signs are, can you find the return policy? Is it easy enough to understand, other terms? Are they sort of burying it and you can't find any of that information anywhere? And finally, I think just doing your homework, that it's been reviewed by someone else, that it's a legitimate place to shop.
And I think the advice you had earlier about just Googling the name of the site and scam, right. It'll pop up if other people have been scammed on that site generally. Yeah. Somebody's asking, what are our thoughts on using LastPass?
I can't really comment on that because they're a competitor. We have a password manager as well, so it's probably, I'll leave that to you, Lisa, if you want to comment.
I would say, I know a lot of people did make a switch when they had their latest security incident. I would take a look at the review sites. I would read Consumer Reports and Tom's Guide and things like that, and let that be your guide. Somebody's asking why the US is so far behind with touchless payments and pay at the table in restaurants. That actually happened to me in the US here at one of my local restaurants. That way your card never leaves your hands. Do you feel like that's a safer alternative?
Yeah,
I with a little handheld device.
Yeah, like I said, I think it's in some ways, yes. but I just don't think there's any option that doesn't have its risks. Yes, and we were behind on the chip in the card. We were, we
Mhm.
are a little bit. That's compared to countries like Japan and some countries in Northern Europe. I think we're very often behind on some of these technologies. But
Let's talk about gift cards for a minute because they're
yeah,
so popular.
oh
So,
yes,
if you're
yeah.
giving one, how can you, when you're at the store, how can you make sure you're buying one that's legit and it hasn't been tampered with? What would the signs be
Yeah,
that
I mean, you have to see if first of all, if that barcode's already been sort of scratched off or unpeeled. It depends on the card. Sometimes you unpeel it,
Yep.
or it's already wrapped in cardboard, but somehow that's been torn open. That's a good sign that you should just stay away from that.
If
And
you if you
yeah,
receive one, any advice
on
on how
using
you
them.
should? Yeah.
I think that if I think that first of all, making sure that if you receive one and you see those kinds of signs, I think I would be very wary of that as well, because I know that criminals can add a secondary barcode onto them that instead gets scanned at the time that it was paid for. And so I think you'd be very careful in general. I mean, I'm a big fan of the electronic gift card. It's not as nice for wrapping, but right, but I think that's a safer option, that you're just, directly sending it to, the recipient. I guess you could print them out and do
Yeah,
something
I think
creative with
some
it as
organizations
well.
will allow you to load them into a digital wallet.
Yeah,
So if you get one, you can ditch the physical card and load it onto a digital wallet. Then you just have to protect your device if it's on your phone, for example.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Something has to be protected along the way, but yes.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
responsibilities no matter what.
Yeah.
Yeah. Somebody's asking if there's a reliable website to use to check the URL of sites that you're concerned about. Was that the service that you
Yeah. Yeah. We have a
mentioned?
tool. It's called ID protection, idprotect.trimaco.com. And there's a browser extension that you would download so that every page you go to, and it's very subtle. If you did a Google search, for example, all the links will show you a little green, yellow, or red. It's just letting you know, don't click on that one. That one's okay. And then once you go to the page, there's a chart on the right if you want to expand it, and it's going to tell you all kinds of things. How many cookies, whether it's trying to track your location, and all kinds of interesting information. So
Okay.
give it a try.
And we put that in the chat so everybody can find the URL. There's 4 or 5 URLs there from Trend Micro. Those are all things you can trust. When I buy a gift card at the time of purchase, I request a gift receipt to include with the card I give to the recipient. However, it is only proof that I put money on the card. So I guess this person is asking, is there anything else you can do to verify when you give somebody a gift card? Is there anything else you can do to make sure that the person benefits from that there's actual value there? Aside from the actual receipt, I'm not sure what else you could do. Just making sure it hasn't been tampered with, right?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, making sure you're picking the right cards. But you
Okay.
can actually have them sent to you. I know that many vendors actually will send either an electronic or a physical gift card directly to you, rather than you going to a store that sells all kinds of gift cards, where there might be greater risk of someone having tampered with the card.
Okay, and with that, I'm going to ask Lucas or Jen to rejoin us. Let me see if there's any other questions here. Because I unfortunately, I'm going to leave you guys to wrap up and over the last couple of minutes here, and I have to drop to give another talk.
It was
But
great to speak with you, Lisa.
yeah, you too, Lynette. Thanks for
Hey,
doing this with us. This was
thank you so
fantastic.
much.
I had no idea Trend Micro had so many free services for people, so that's super, super useful. Let's do this again sometime.
Absolutely.
This was good. All right, Jen, do you want to close us out? Or Lucas? Oh, you're on mute.
Close this out real quick. Thank you all for joining us. You can find all of our free resources at StaySafeOnline.org and follow us at our social media at the usernames and links on this slide. All of the free resources from Trend Micro that we mentioned are in the chat. and we'll be sent out with this recording as well. And so recording will be available at StaySafeOnline.org by tomorrow morning. Thank you all again, and thank you, Lynette, for joining us.
Thank you, Lucas.